For the last 25 days, I've been doing something I've called the 25 Days of SportsMas. I've been sharing stories about sports that might get you into sports for the first time. I covered a range of sports including basketball, hockey, soccer, football, tennis, F1, Nascar, pretty much everything I enjoy watching. And the goal with these stories was to make sure that if you had never watched the sport before, or even more importantly, if you had been told that the sport was not for you, it was a story that might grab your attention and make you think, hey, maybe this sport is for me. And if you've been following me at all, you know that that's kind of my whole thing. But 25 days is a lot of days, and you might have missed some, or you might be brand new here and you might not have seen any of them. So I wanted to put all of the stories into one video so you can just watch them straight through. Spoiler alert, that is this video. But I also want to see if any of these stories are stories that you wanted to hear more than 90 seconds worth of content about, because some of these stories are some of my favorite sports stories in history, and cutting them down to 90 seconds was at times a really big challenge. So I'm about to press play on this supercut. But as you're watching, if there's a story that you're like, man, I really wish we could hear more about that, let me know in the comments. And the ones that people want to hear the most about, I will turn into deep dive videos. So without further ado, I hope you enjoyed the 25 Days of SportsMas. Michael Jordan once had to pull his teammate out of a Las Vegas hotel room in order to win his 6th and final NBA championship. Even if you don't know anything about basketball, you definitely have heard the name Michael Jordan. But you may not know about the two other stars who made a lot of those championships possible. Those are Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman. Dennis really challenged our societal norms when it came to both basketball and masculinity. He often wore painted nails, pretty crazy fashion statements, and wild hairdos. And one of the other things that he's pretty famous for is needing a mid-season break from his job. During the 1998 season, Scottie Pippen was out for 35 games with an ankle injury. And in that time, Dennis Rodman really had to fill in the role, which if you've ever had a job been expected to pick up someone else's slack, you might be able to understand the stress that Dennis was under. Once Scottie returned from his injury, Dennis approached Phil Jackson and said, I need a vacation. But this was not the first time that this had happened. During the 1997 finals, Phil Jackson granted Dennis Rodman 48 hours to go to Vegas. And since that went so well the year before, Phil said, why not, buddy? We'll see you in 48 hours. Now, Michael Jordan was not thrilled about this. And it turns out he had good reason, because you'll never believe this, but they did not see Dennis Rodman in 48 hours. In fact, he stayed in Vegas so long partying with his then girlfriend Carmen Electra that Michael Jordan himself had to fly to Vegas, find his hotel room, bust open the door, and pull Dennis Rodman out of bed. In the end, things ended up working out just fine. And ultimately, the Bulls went on to win Michael Jordan his 6th and final championship. And to be honest, that era of basketball will always be one of the best. What do Formula One, Brad Pitt, George Clooney, and Matt Damon all have in common? They may have been involved in one of the biggest diamond heists we have seen in years. And today we are traveling back to the 2004 Monaco Grand Prix. In 2004, the Jaguar Formula One team found that they really needed an influx of cash. And it's not uncommon that we have seen movies become sponsors for a single race. And that's what happened with Ocean's 12. But this sponsorship was going to be different. In addition to having the movie's title on the side of the car as a sponsor, Jaguar was looking for a big PR stunt. And so they came up with the idea of embedding a $250,000 diamond into the nose cone. At first, the weekend seemed like it was going great. Both of the drivers made it through practice sessions and qualifying without losing the diamond or causing any damage to the front of the car. But then the race happened. And within the very first lap, one of the Jaguars had crashed into the barrier. And of course, it was nose cone first. Despite all of this being on camera, the driver being okay, and marshals hunting for hours throughout all of the debris, the diamond to this day has never been found. And there are a lot of theories as to what happened. Could the diamond simply have been brushed away with the other debris? Could a marshal who was close on the track have pocketed the diamond before anyone else noticed? Was the driver in on it? Or was it a carefully orchestrated marketing stunt from the team itself? We'll never know what actually happened to the diamond. What we do know is that it wasn't insured. Me personally, I like the idea that this was an elaborate heist that everyone was involved in. And that just might be my sense of whimsy. But what do you think? Elaborate marketing stunt, quiet heist, or just a genuine accident? Let me know which of the three you think it was, and come back tomorrow for the next day of SportsMas. The Wicked obsession has made its way to the NFL. And if you haven't heard of Kobie Turner, he's about to turn you into a football fan. And today we're talking about the LA Rams defensive tackle Kobie Turner. Kobie balances a full-time NFL career with his music aspirations. And that has been the case for a very long time. You may have seen him on social media recently because he posted a video from his hotel room at an away game, learning the choreography to What Is This Feeling from Wicked. But Kobie has always balanced his love of music with his love of football. Kobie's nickname is actually the Conductor. He grew up with music as a large part of his household, crediting gospel, R&B, and reggae music as a big part of his childhood. Reggae in particular stands out to him because he always knew if he woke up listening to it, it meant it was going to be a long day cleaning the house. In high school, Kobie actually balanced football with choir and 3 a cappella groups. And while you can see him playing for the LA Rams, if you go to his social media, you can also hear him singing really well. He did a beautiful piano cover of I'm Not That Girl, and you can also hear him frequently doing acoustic guitar songs, and he even sang the national anthem for an LA Kings game back in January. I love Kobie in particular, not just because he plays for my team, but because he shows how much joy you can have when it comes to sports and your passions. He is like the genuine embodiment of Troy Bolton from High School Musical. You can play football at the highest level and you can sing. As an added incentive to start watching some LA Rams games this season, Kobie has promised that if he gets a chance to do a victory dance, it it will be wicked choreography. So tune into some LA Rams games because I think with the power of collective thought, we can get Kobie to do that dance. In women's hockey, fighting is technically not part of the game, but as we all know, it is a part of hockey, which is why today we're talking about the PWHL and the team that has already started multiple fights on the ice. Every time I talk about the PWHL, I get notes saying I wish they would let them fight. And technically, if you're just going by the rulebook, you're right. Fighting is officially not a part of the PWHL, and if you do fight, you could be ejected from the game. But one of the major differences between the PWHL and previous women's hockey leagues is the fact that they are allowed to be physical with each other. They are in fact allowed to check. We do see them throw each other into the boards, and they do get pretty physical in gameplay. And a lot of that is legal contact. What's not legal contact is, throwing fists. But last year after the Olympic break, the Toronto and Boston teams had a game. And that game sparked our first brawl in the PWHL. Multiple players were involved, and we saw just how aggressive women's hockey players are. The fight was broken up by referees, and we got back to some good, kind of clean hockey. But that was also not the first time that the Toronto team had gotten physical with another. In March, when they played against Montreal, we saw them pack the penalty box on both sides. If you look up the footage from that fight, there is a particularly hard hit into the boards where one of the players flies. And as the referees were trying to separate some players, other players were getting in on the action. And while I'm not officially gonna say that fighting is a very sportsmanlike part of sports, what I am gonna say is that if you thought women's hockey was not aggressive, you would be mistaken. And if you're looking for a team that knows how to throw a punch, Toronto might be your team. I highly encourage you to watch the PWHL this season as it's free to stream, and come back tomorrow for the next day of SportsMas. 4 years ago, the NBA trapped most of their players in Disney World, and Jimmy Butler used the opportunity to start his own business that is still thriving to this very day. In order to finish out the 2020 NBA season, the NBA came up with the idea of creating a bubble. All of the players and staff had to stay in the same location, and that location was Disney World. This resulted in a lot of players going stir crazy. We watched some of the players go fishing and play golf, and another player turned his hotel room into a wine cellar. But none of that tops Jimmy Butler. If you're new to the world of basketball, you may not know that Jimmy Butler is maybe one of the funniest people to ever walk the earth. But when all of these players were trapped at Disney World, Jimmy Butler was one of the only guys who had access to really good coffee. He had had all of these things shipped to his hotel room and was making coffee for himself. But when he realized that there was no good options for coffee on campus, Jimmy Butler started a coffee shop from his own hotel room, where you can see that he was charging a pretty reasonable price of $20 no matter what size you got. And if you're wondering if those options were real, they absolutely were. Jimmy Butler imports and roasts his own coffee beans, and had taught himself how to do a number of different coffee drinks. But the best part of this story is that Jimmy Butler did not give up his coffee business after the bubble. When he was serving coffee just to the other guys in the NBA, he called the coffee brand Big Face Coffee. And in interviews afterwards, he said that he's actually continued to teach himself latte art, and if he could take 5 years off, he would just start his own cafe. While he's too important to the NBA to actually do that, Jimmy did take Big Face Coffee and turn it into a real brand. To this day, you can still buy coffee beans from him, and who knows, in retirement, you might be able to stop by Jimmy's official coffee shop. This morning, these two brothers made history, and that moment is a full circle, heartwarming one. If you're new to the world of cargo fast, this is Charles and Arthur Leclerc. Charles, the older of the two, currently drives for Ferrari in Formula One. This morning, they both made history by becoming the first brothers to take on a Formula One session at the same time. But their journey to that moment was not an easy one. Formula One is one of the most expensive sports to participate in. Charles Leclerc has spoken multiple times about the fact that his parents made big sacrifices for him to get to the point that he's at. But something he spoke about today was the fact that at a certain point, his brother actually had to give up on his dreams for Charles to continue chasing his own. Their father was not able to financially support both of their journeys, and because Charles was the older brother and further ahead, he was the one who continued on. Ultimately, Charles was able to get funding outside of their family, which allowed Arthur to restart his training. But in 2017, when Charles was still in junior categories, his father passed away. But Charles told him a little white lie before he did, that he had officially made it to Formula One, which ultimately did end up coming true a month later. Since then, Charles has had a pretty storied career in Formula One. This year, he was able to break a small curse and win his home race in Monaco. In that same season, we were at the final race, and Charles was able to share that free practice moment with his brother. We even saw the two of them slow down on track side by side so that they could wave to each other. If you're the type of person who wants to root for someone who really deserves a win, Charles Leclerc is probably your driver. Today, both of them were able to achieve a dream that their father worked so hard to help them get to. And I think there's something really wonderful and easy to root for when you see how appreciative and honored they are to be able to get here. This 36-year-old accountant once lived his professional hockey dreams when, with only a few hours' notice, he was called up to the NHL to help Chicago out with an emergency goalie situation. And today, we are talking about Scott Foster. Back in 2018, Scott was a 36-year-old full-time accountant. He had played goalie up through college hockey, but at the time was just playing in a recreational league. But a few hours before puck drop, they announced that they had signed Scott to an amateur tryout contract and that he would be an emergency backup goalie. At the time, the team's goalie was out injured, and their backup goalie had been injured just before the game, which meant that Colin D'Elia, who was filling in, was making his NHL debut. Now, this was not the first time that Scott had been signed as an emergency backup goalie, but every other time he just showed up, watched the game, and went home. But in the third period, their goalie had to sub out because he was cramping, and that meant that Scott was told to suit up. The Hawks were up, and all he had to do was help them keep that lead. But he did a little bit more than that, because Scott didn't just block one goal. He blocked 7 shots on goal by the Jets. And in the end, the entire stadium, who had not heard of Scott before, was chanting his name. And the Hawks took a victory of 6-2. After the game, Scott was given the team belt, which is given to the best player of the game. And then the next day, he went back to his full-time job. And there's something really beautiful about him achieving that kind of fantasy scenario that everyone kind of thinks about. Like, one day I could make it through an NHL game for just one period. Scott can actually say that. And that's the beauty of hockey sometimes. If you don't watch it, you're missing a lot of magic on the ice. The most watched tennis match in history took place between a young woman in her prime and a 55-year-old retired tennis player who believed he could beat her just because he was a man. In 1973, Bobby Riggs was on a mission. He was formerly a #1 ranked tennis player in the 1930s and 40s, but at the time was retired and 55 years old. And he was on a mission to prove that women's tennis was an inferior game. He claimed that women's tennis was so bad that a man like him, so far out of his prime, could beat any of the top women's players on the tour. He had challenged Billie Jean King a number of times, but she had always rejected him, until another female tennis player, Margaret Court, accepted his challenge and lost. At that point, Billie said she knew she had to take him on and she had to win. There was an extreme amount of press put into this, a $100,000 prize put up, and the exhibition match was referred to as the Battle of the Sexes. And on September 20th, 1973, Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs took the court. 50 million Americans tuned in to watch the match, and an estimated 90 million people worldwide were watching. To this day, this is still the most watched tennis match in history. And what they watched was Billie Jean King dominate. She won the match in 3 straight sets, proving once and for all that women's tennis was a serious game. That same year, the US Open became the first sporting event in the world to offer equal prize money for both men and women. And as we all know, equity in women's sports is still something we're fighting for, both when it comes to the way the sports are run themselves and the way that people approach them culturally. But we wouldn't have made as much progress as we have if it weren't for Billie Jean King. This Iowa basketball star almost didn't play her final season in college. Now she's set to be a major part of the WNBA's expansion. And I'm not talking about Caitlin Clark. Kate Martin was planning to play basketball for Iowa starting in 2018, but the summer before her freshman year, it was announced that she had torn her ACL. When something like this happens in college basketball, you can take what's called a redshirt year. It allows you to maintain an extra year of college eligibility. After healing, she came back to the team and played from the bench. But the following year, Kate made it to the starting lineup and was actually voted team captain. Kate had an incredible junior year, being named captain again and starting all 32 games. And in what would have been her 4th and final season with the team, was named captain once more and also broke her nose for the 3rd time. However, Caitlin Clark told her that she didn't want to come back without her. So Kate returned to Iowa for a 5th and final year to play alongside her friend Caitlin Clark. And when she attended the WNBA draft, she was actually just there to support, but during the second round, Kate was told to come out of the balcony and get down to the orchestra level seats. She was about to get drafted to the Las Vegas Aces. Completely outside of her own expectations, Kate Martin became a professional basketball player. Kate Martin was absolutely the most beloved rookie by her team. She and Asia Wilson had their own handshake, so when Kate was poached in the WNBA expansion draft by the newest team, the Valkyries, there was considerable outrage amongst her teammates. But this is a really big deal for Kate. WNBA is expanding and Kate will be a part of the inaugural roster for the Golden State Valkyries. Kate Martin is a perfect example of keeping your head up in sports and realizing that even if you are not getting all of the spotlight and attention, with hard work, dedication, and a good attitude, your time will come. This NASCAR driver threw his bumper at another driver's windshield during a race, and he ended up with a pretty unique sponsor. Earlier this year, Joey Gase was participating in a NASCAR race, and during that race, he was crashed into by another driver, Dawson Cram. That crash ended Joey's race, but Dawson continued to drive, and rather than simply safely exit the track and move on with his life, Joey got out of his car, ripped the bumper off of his wrecked vehicle, and patiently waited for Dawson to come back around on the next lap. And when he did, Joey took his bumper, wound up, and threw the bumper at Dawson's windshield. And because he's got pretty good aim, did manage to strike the vehicle. And if you're thinking this is a little bit of an overreaction, you should know that Joey said he was pretty sure he gave Dawson his start in Xfinity, and that Dawson even borrows tools from their team. So Joey not only felt he was wronged on track, but felt that it really crossed the line into personal territory. Dawson, for his part, quickly created t-shirts depicting the incident and sold them, saying that he would donate all of the proceeds to charity. NASCAR did fine Joey $5,000, but Joey made the money back up pretty quickly because his antics on track had gone viral. Because one of the sponsors that was on Joey's car at the time was, and I literally cannot make this up, McGuff the Crime Dog, with the slogan "Race Against Crime." Following the incident getting so much popularity and conversation, Bumpers That Deliver by MBI Auto said, "Guys, I don't think there's ever going to be a greater opportunity to advertise our product." These are the kind of stories from motorsports that are just so fun. It turns out that the LA Kings locker room is full of Lando Norris fans, and today the goal is to prove to every Lando Norris fan, your hockey team is going to be the LA Kings. One of the time-honored traditions of the NHL is a locker room celebration of the player of the game. Once all of the guys get off the ice and into the locker room, there's an unofficial team-voted MVP of the game. And rather than a trophy or something official, a number of teams have a unique tradition in an item that they give to that player. And a lot of those items have really interesting stories behind them. Back in 2011, the New York Rangers played a game in Sweden, and while they were out out at a club, they met a woman named Helena. Helena was wearing a fedora. This fedora was from H&M and was worth about $18 retail. At the time, the Rangers center was named Brad Richards. And having become so enamored with this fedora, he paid Helena $100 for the hat. That fedora then became the item that they gave their most valuable player in the locker room. We've seen other items like customized WWE belts, hats, and axe. And most recently, the LA Kings have changed their item. Instead of a player of the game, they award a driver of the day. And that driver of the day gets a Lando Norris helmet. Sometimes you'll get video of this, but you'll definitely get a photo of that player putting the helmet on and being embraced by some of his teammates. Player of the Game awards are one of the most fun pieces of lore that you can have in hockey. Usually the item is something unique to the team, sometimes has a very fun story behind it, and often has a little bit of secrecy as to why that item is the item. So if you're a Formula One fan, or specifically a McLaren or Lando Norris girly, and you're looking for a sport to fill that off season, join us over at the LA Kings, because the guys in the locker room are really good at fangirl behavior. I'm just here so I won't get fined. You've probably heard those words before, and today we're talking about their origins. That phrase was made famous in 2015 during Super Bowl Media Day when Marshawn Lynch, who played for the Seattle Seahawks, answered every single question at his press conference with "I'm here so I won't get fined" or some variation thereof. Every NFL player is required to make themselves available for media after a game, and if they don't show up for those required media appearances, they are fined by the NFL. Marshawn in particular did not like showing up for media press days, and for the Super Bowl, that fine was rumored to be about $500,000. So Marshawn showed up to press, and when he arrived, he started a timer on his phone for 4 minutes and 50 seconds. Then he announced to the media that was present that they could ask whatever question they wanted, but he would be answering them exactly the same. What followed was 4 minutes and 51 seconds of him patiently listening to every single reporter's question and answering it the same way. "I'm here so I won't get fined." When that timer hit 4 minutes and 50 seconds, Marshawn leaned into the microphone, said time, stood up, and left. And in those 4 minutes and 51 seconds, he created an iconic moment that I would say is probably one you've heard even if you don't watch football. Marshawn has gone on to be a pop culture icon. You may have seen him on the reality television show Stars on Mars, and he's also a minority owner of the NHL team, the Seattle Kraken, which, fun fact, became the first team to hire a female behind-the-bench coach this year. If there's one thing I hope you learn from this, is that sports are about more than just winning or losing, and that oftentimes the athletes' personalities could be the thing that gets you into the sport itself. 5 women have raced in Formula One, but only one has scored a point. If you're new to the world of cargo fast, you may not know that Formula One is not a gender-separated sport, and in the nearly 75 years of Formula One, 5 women have actually raced in the sport. The last woman to compete was Giovanna Amati in 1992, but between 1974 and 1976, Lella Lombardi drove in Formula One. Lella was born in a small town in Italy, and her father was a butcher, and her very first job was actually driving his delivery truck. Lella expressed a passion for racing and started a karting career, and she continued to push on through the ranks. Before her, only one woman had ever driven in Formula One, and that was back in 1958. But in 1975, at the Spanish Grand Prix, Lella Lombardi became the first woman to score in Formula One. And if you look at the stat books, you may hear people say that she only scored half a point, and that was because tragically one of the other drivers did crash into the stands, which ended the race early, and by the rules at that time, everyone was awarded half of the points that they would have earned by finishing the race. And Lella's career was not just in Formula One. In 1974, she became the first woman to participate in the Race of Champions, and following her time in Formula One, she also competed in sports car racing, including the 24-hour of Le Mans, and in 1977, she actually raced in NASCAR. 3 women did make it to Formula One after her, and there have been many women who have made waves in this sport since. And so if you're new to this world, I hope what you learn from Lella is that this constant talk of women can't be in Formula One, or that there's never been a woman in Formula One, is just simply not true, and that Formula One and motorsports as a whole are absolutely sports for women, both behind the wheel and as fans. One of the most famous scorers on the US women's national team once had to unexpectedly play goalie during the World Cup. Mia Hamm is one of the best soccer players to ever play the game, and by the 2000s she was a household name. But in 1995 at the World Cup, with 5 minutes left in the second group stage game against Denmark, the US goalie Brianna Scurry received a red card, which throws you out of the game. And normally when something like this happens, you would substitute in another goalie. But there are a maximum number of substitutions that a coach can use during play, and at that point the US team had already used the maximum number of substitutions. And with pretty much no warning, Mia Hamm, an attacker, was told she was the one that was going into goal. As you can imagine, it's a very different skill set to score goals versus stop them. But Mia Hamm got in the goal with 5 minutes left on the game clock, which meant that all she had to do was survive for 5 minutes. But Mia actually did more than that. She stopped 2 goal attempts by Denmark, and the US won that game 2-0. To this day, Mia Hamm remains the only non-goalie to play goalie in a World Cup game. And Mia Hamm went on to be the legendary player we know her as today. She has 2 Olympic gold medals, 1 FIFA World Cup championship, and she was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2007. In 2013, she became the first woman inducted into the World Football Hall of Fame, and until 2013, she held the record for the most international goals scored. If you're just getting into soccer, obviously you can't watch Mia Hamm still on the field, but you can support the teams that she's actually a part owner of. Mia Hamm is a part owner of both the men's and the women's teams that are based in Los Angeles, and Angel City Football Club is a perfect team to get behind if you're just starting to get into women's soccer or football, depending on where you're from. This 9-year-old girl got the attention of of Steph Curry with a letter about basketball shoes. If you know anything about modern day basketball, you have heard of Steph Curry. He is arguably one of the greatest three-point shooters to ever play the game, has won 4 NBA championships with the Golden State Warriors, and this year at the Olympics finally added a gold medal to his trophy case. So you might imagine that young basketball players, when asked what shoe they want to wear, often pick Steph Curry's shoe. But back in 2018, Riley, a then 9-year-old basketball player, went on to Under Armour's website hoping to order herself a pair of Curry 5s, and unfortunately discovered that Under Armour only sold these shoes in men's and boys sizes. Riley, with the help of her parents, made her voice heard. She handwrote Steph Curry a letter asking why the Curry 5s were not available in girl sizes. And Steph Curry actually got back to her. He said that he had spent 2 days speaking to Under Armour and figuring out how to fix the sizing and make them available on the website. In March of 2019, he invited Riley to help him design a special version of the Curry 6s, and the insole was designed by Riley herself. And while something like a basketball shoe may seem like a very small thing, little things like not being able to buy the shoe you want in your own size in your section are moments that do push young girls away from sports. They are small things that tell you are not welcome here. And Riley was someone who at 9 years old said, "I'm gonna be here. You guys can adjust and let me wear your shoe, or you can lose out on the money that girls playing basketball want to spend." So whether you're new to basketball or aren't sure if the NBA is a sport that will welcome you, hopefully this story will inspire you to be like Riley and make space for yourself whether or not someone tells you this is for you. These two teammates went from childhood best friends to having a rivalry so infamous the internet gave them a ship name. In the sport of Formula 1, there are 20 drivers spread across 10 teams, and there are 2 championships that everyone is competing for. One is the type of championship you're used to from other sports, which is a team-based competition called the Constructors' Championship. But Formula 1 also has an individual title called the World Drivers' Championship. Your biggest competition is your direct teammate. Now, because of the fact that Formula 1 drivers start this sport so young, oftentimes the drivers that make it to the grid have known each other for most of their lives. That was the case with Nico and Lewis. Nico actually made it to Formula 1 a year before Lewis did. But once Lewis made it to Formula 1, their competition had much higher stakes. Lewis moved to Mercedes, becoming his old best friend's teammate, and that friendship quickly turned into a massive rivalry. And at one point, the damage that they're causing each other becomes so bad that their boss makes them sign a contract saying that they will be financially responsible for any damage they cause to each other's cars. And then in 2016, in their final race of being teammates, Lewis and Nico have brought the championship fight down to the final race. Lewis is in first place and Nico is in second, and Lewis ignores team orders, intentionally slowing down, hoping that Nico will get overtaken by the other drivers. His plan didn't work, and Nico still finishes in second, winning the championship overall. Nico announces his retirement. That rivalry was the stuff of legends and was dubbed Brosadies by fans. So if you're a fan of shared history, petty behavior, and friends to enemies to maybe friends again narratives, Formula 1 might be your sport. The very first woman to be drafted for the PWHL almost didn't play hockey at all. And not only that, 2 years prior, she was cut from the Olympic team that everyone expected her to make. If you're not familiar with women's hockey, the PWHL, or Professional Women's Hockey League, was just started last year. And in that inaugural draft, Taylor Heisey went first overall. But Taylor found hockey by chance. In fact, Taylor's family was so into basketball, she and her brothers had to make a certain number of free throws before they could go inside for dinner. When she was in the first grade, her entire class got notes in their backpack, and they offered to let you play hockey for free, including the gear. She was first invited to the national team at 15 years old. She won 3 gold medals with the under-18 team and was the team captain, and she had never been cut from a national roster since her first invitation. That is, until it was time for her to make the jump to the senior level in 2021, when for the first time in her career, she was cut from the national team and told she would not make the 2022 Olympics. She took a few days off, and then she posted to social media, "Be comfortable with waiting a little longer for the things that you deserve." She went on to take the scoring record in the NCAA. She was named the top collegiate player in the United States, and in August of 2022, she made her Team USA senior debut. Then the following year in 2023, Taylor became the very first #1 overall draft pick in the PWHL. Her team, the Minnesota Frost, won the very first Walter Cup. Taylor is still playing in the PWHL for the Minnesota Frost. So if you can learn anything from this story and from Taylor, I hope it's these words: be comfortable with waiting a little longer for the things that you deserve. Lindsey Vonn is one of the most successful American skiers, and now after turning 40 and having a knee replacement, she is officially returning to the sport. Lindsey Vonn had her World Cup debut at 16 years old, and she had an incredible career with a number of accolades. She went to 3 Olympic Games and won 3 Olympic medals, 1 gold and 2 bronze, but the only thing that held Lindsey back was her injuries, and instead of competing in the 2014 Olympics, was actually there as a commentator. Lindsey tried to mount a comeback after rehabbing those injuries, and did participate in the 2018 Games. Ahead of the 2019 season, Lindsey announced that it would be her last, and at the beginning of the year, she had a disappointing start, including being unable to finish one of her races at her season debut. Lindsey ultimately made it through the 2019 World Championships, where she took what everyone expected to be her final bronze medal in the sport. And at age 34, that made her the oldest woman to ever medal at the World Championships. But last April, Lindsey underwent a partial knee replacement surgery. This weekend, she will return to her first World Cup race in nearly 6 years. And if Lindsey does does medal this year, she will beat her own record for being the oldest woman to medal at a World Cup. I think in sports, and especially in women's sports, we are constantly looking at this expiration date. But stories like Lindsey Vonn show that sometimes we are limiting ourselves and the sport by thinking that way. And that no matter what your passion is, it doesn't mean that you have to give it up just because you hit a certain age. So I'm excited to watch Lindsey at the World Cup this weekend, and honestly, maybe at the 2026 Olympics. The very first female behind the bench coach in the NHL almost missed the job opportunity because she thought the email was spam. There are a ton of reasons to be a fan of the Seattle Kraken. Their goalie does deep dive Formula 1 updates on social media, sometimes they fly their mascot from the ceiling, and this year they made the history-making decision to hire Jessica Campbell, which made her the first female behind the bench coach in the NHL. Jessica Campbell started her career as a hockey player herself, and she played for the Canadian national team until 2017 when she retired. She launched her own business called JC Power Skating, where she worked one-on-one with a number of NHL players, and her reputation as a coach started to open other doors. She was an assistant coach for the German men's national team, making her the first woman to be on the coaching staff of a world championship team. And then in July of 2022, she was hired as an assistant coach for an AHL team. She became the first woman to be a full-time assistant behind the bench coach in the AHL, and just 2 seasons later, she was hired by the Seattle Kraken. But one of the funniest parts of her story is that when the coaching staff reached out to interview her for this position, they used her contact us form on the website, and she assumed that it was a prank. No one could possibly be reaching out to her about an NHL coaching staff job. And at first she ignored the email, but then she thought, ooh, what if I'm wrong? And thankfully she replied. But Jessica hopes, and so do I, that soon enough that won't be an odd thing to see. Jessica may be the first, but she has no intention of being the last. Medieval armored cage matches are still happening in 2024. And today, with great joy, we are breaking the first rule of Fight Club and talking about armored MMA. Now, if you ever thought sports are just a little too modern for me, I wish we could go back to the days where things were done honorably, both contestants in the sporting event wore full suits of armor, and they just pounded each other into the ground. Armored MMA may be for you. This league is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. 2 opponents enter a ring. They are clad in armor from head to toe. They are also holding weapons, and they are going to engage in an MMA match. Now, I know the first question on your mind. Does your armor have to be period accurate? Yeah, absolutely. Armored MMA actually has authenticity committees. And so if you were like, I kind of want to mishmash my armor together from different centuries, no sir, you will not be allowed to fight. We would need a much longer video for me to go full nerd about all of the armor, but one thing that is very interesting is that the helmets are actually fitted with concussion padding. Otherwise though, period accurate. Athletes can use either 1 or 2-handed weapons, including swords, maces, and axes. And of course they can use a shield. And then when it comes to the fighting, it's pretty similar to regular MMA. You can take down your opponent, fight on the ground, or obviously one big difference, you can fight with your weapons. There's also the ability to disarm your opponent. If this sounds exciting to you, you actually can go on their website and find a group and start your armored MMA journey right now. I know I personally long for the days of sword fighting, so I am absolutely planning to find my way to an armored MMA match. NFL quarterbacks are making headlines this week by showering some of their teammates with extravagant gifts. But if you're new to football, you may not know why this is such a time-honored tradition. Joe Burrow from Cincinnati gifted his O-line authentic Japanese katanas. The 49ers quarterback Brock Purdy gifted his O-line brand new trucks, and Patrick Mahomes went with gift baskets that included Rolexes, Yeti coolers, and cowboy boots. Those guys are referred to as the O-line, which stands for offensive linemen. And their only job all game is to make sure that the quarterback can do his job. Offense does not run without the O-line, but the quarterback and the receivers are the ones who typically get all of the attention. The O-line is made up of 5 players. 1 center, 2 guards, which are the players on either side of the center, and 2 offensive tackles, which are the guys on the end. It's the job of those 5 guys to make sure that the quarterback has enough time without being tackled to actually run their offensive play. That means that these guys are holding off the defense and that their quarterback doesn't get sacked. Plain and simple, the quarterback cannot do his job without the help of his offensive line. And if the offensive line for some reason decided not to do their job, that quarterback would spend a lot of time eating turf. But like I mentioned, the quarterback gets most of the attention. And so the tradition of quarterbacks giving their offensive linemen extravagant gifts is their way of saying, thank you for letting me do my job and keeping me from getting turned into a pancake. So what may seem like a show of opulence is really a way for the quarterbacks to say thank you to their offensive linemen and give them a little bit of the star and spotlight treatment that they're not used to. Katie Schumacher-Cawley just made history in women's sports. Today she became the first woman to ever coach an NCAA women's volleyball team to a title. And she she did it all while battling breast cancer. Katie started out as a volleyball player herself, and in 1999, she won her own national title while she was in college, playing for Penn State. That title was the first of 7 that the coach at the time, Russ Rose, ended up winning with Penn State. Katie eventually came back to Penn State as an assistant coach for her former coach, Russ Rose, and when he retired in 2021, he handed the program over to Katie. Penn State had actually not made it to the Final Four since 2014, and at the start of this year in September, Katie announced that she had been diagnosed with breast cancer. But even with all of her treatment, Katie did not miss a single practice or game this year, and she coached the team all the way to the championship title today. This championship was already going to be historic regardless of who won, because for the first time in history, both teams were coached by female coaches. Penn State was going up against Louisville, and the game had a record-breaking attendance at just over 21,000 fans in the stands. Penn State beat Louisville in 4 straight sets, and their win made history, with Katie becoming the first woman to ever coach an NCAA women's volleyball team to their title. And another thing that's really exciting about this is if you look at the viewership of women's volleyball, it has been explosive over the last 2 years. That, of course, is partially because of NIL deals, but games like this one are going to continue to bring people not only to the stands, but bringing higher and higher ratings on TV. So congratulations to Penn State and to Katie. Hockey has a lot of odd traditions, but one of the best is the legend of the octopus. You have probably seen videos on social media of things being thrown onto the ice at hockey games, but the Detroit Red Wings have something called the legend of the octopus. It involves throwing an entire octopus onto the ice. This tradition was started in April of 1952 because Pete and Jerry Cusimano, who owned a fish market, showed up to a game and threw an entire octopus on the ice. This was because back then the NHL only had 6 teams, and 4 of those teams made it to the playoffs. The octopus's 8 tentacles were meant to represent the 8 games that Detroit had to win the Stanley Cup. Now, the thing about a legend, it starts with a win. Detroit went on to win the Stanley Cup that year, and so Pete and Jerry continued to show up and throw octopi onto the ice. In 1995, Detroit gave themselves an unofficial mascot, which was an octopus named Al. To this day, you will still see fans engaging in the legend of the octopus, and sometimes you will even see fans travel to other cities only to throw octopi on the ice at an away game. And there have even been other ice throw traditions that were born in response to this. The Nashville Predators, for example, throw catfish onto the ice, and there are so many other funny hockey traditions just like this. But I think it highlights one of my favorite parts of hockey, which is the community that builds itself around the sport. So while I cannot personally encourage you to go to a Detroit game and throw an octopus on the ice, I can encourage you to find out your local team's fun tradition and find a new community of fans in hockey. On Father's Day in 1996, Michael Jordan won his 4th NBA championship, and this photo is one of my favorites in sports history. Michael Jordan was on top of the world. He had won 3 NBA championships back to back, but shortly after he won his 3rd title, his father was murdered. And shortly after that, Michael abruptly announced his retirement from the NBA. He said that he had lost the desire to play basketball, and instead he was going to play baseball. And you've probably heard a narrative about how bad he was at baseball, and you may even remember it referenced in Space Jam. But Michael wanted to play baseball because his father had always told him that he could, and he always said that he dreamed of him being in the MLB. In The Last Dance, Michael talked about his last conversation with his father, and the fact that he was still pushing this idea of him playing baseball professionally. So Michael did take a detour. Not only did he try to train as hard as he possibly could, he had a moment to live out his dad's 2nd dream for him. Michael ultimately returned to the NBA with a 2-word press release: "I'm back." And that following season with the Chicago Bulls, he led them to another championship. That championship was won on Father's Day nearly 3 years after he lost his dad. Michael dedicated the championship to his father, saying, "This is for Daddy." In the locker room where he had celebrated his 3 previous championships with his dad, he crumpled to the floor and cried. I love this photo so much because it reminds me, even after the worst thing that could possibly happen to you, there's still greatness left in your life. Sports and athletes like Michael Jordan can teach you that. They can teach you to keep going even when it feels like the world is ending, because as long as you push yourself, there are still memories to be made. The longest NFL game in history took place the very first time they played on Christmas Day, and it caused a societal uproar so big that the NFL didn't play on Christmas Day for years after. Today, 2 NFL games will be played, but the NFL used to actively avoid scheduling games on Christmas Day. But on December 25th, 1971, they scheduled their very first Christmas Day doubleheader. The first game, which featured the Cowboys and the Vikings, went off without much of a hitch, but the second game, which started at 4 p.m. Eastern and featured the Miami Dolphins and the Kansas City Chiefs, went on for so long that to this day it is still the longest game in NFL history. At first, it seemed like it was a completely one-sided game. Kansas City scored first with a field goal, followed by a touchdown, and they left the Dolphins completely scoreless for the first quarter. But when it came to the second quarter, the Dolphins tied it up with 10 points of their own and kept the Chiefs from scoring. Then in the 3rd and 4th quarters, both teams scored a touchdown each. But at the end of the first overtime, both teams had gone scoreless. So we went into second overtime, and the game was finally won 7 minutes and 40 seconds into that second overtime period by the Miami Dolphins kicker. The NFL actually received complaints from viewers that it had wreaked havoc on their Christmas dinners. After that, the NFL did not schedule a single game on Christmas Day for the next 17 seasons, and the NBA had complete control of the holiday. After the long ban, Christmas Day games have returned for the NFL. Whether this was the first time you saw those videos or you watched them again just for fun, thanks for joining me on the 25 Days of SportsMas journey. If you liked any of these stories and you wanted to hear more about them, be sure to let me know in the comment section of this video, and be sure to subscribe right now so that you don't miss any of those extended videos. I will always be talking about sports and trying to find ways to get new people into them, and most importantly, making sure that you feel like you can ask questions and enjoy yourself, because I very passionately believe that sports should be for everyone, and I'm going to make sure that this is a place where that feels true. So Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and I will see you soon.